Welcome to Chinuch Today. I am your host, Rabbi Yehuda Garfield. Please join me as we highlight innovative ideas and inspiring people from the world of Chinuch. Hello and welcome to another episode of Chinuch Today podcast. This is your Yehuda Garfield. I want to tell you about something that happened to me about 10 years ago, give or take a few years, where our family visited Norfolk, Virginia, where my mother's sister, Aunt Andy Pollock, and Uncle Earl Pollock live. Shout out to Aunt Andy, who is the principal of the local Torah elementary school there, doing a great job and very committed to the Chinuch of Klal Yisrael, specifically in Norfolk. We were visiting for Pesach, last days of Pesach, and as one does on Chol HaMoed, I believe we went to the circus. Remember that thing they used to have called the circus? And we're there watching the circus, and I look behind me, and my first cousin, Gedalia Schwartz, who lives there, amazing guy, has headphones on. I thought it was a little strange, like we're on this family trip, and we're, doing this thing. We're at the circus, and he's sitting there listening to his headphones. So we're like, all right, what's the deal with Gedalia? And I'm like, well, you have to understand, he found this new rabbi. He loves his Shiurim. He listens to it day and night. And for the next few days, that's all Gedalia, whenever you see him, that's what he's doing. He's listening to these Shiurim. Like, who is this person? He's like, you got to hear these Shiurim. They're amazing. I'll put you on the listserv or the WhatsApp group. I forgot how it was shared at that time. This Rabbi Glatstein. Of course, I had never heard of Rabbi Glatstein, but we're like, okay. And that was the beginning of my introduction to the amazing Shiurim of Rabbi Yehuda Glatstein. And Gedalia is still very close to Rabbi Glatstein and is got to be one of the biggest fans of Rabbi Glatstein. And so recently we were talking, and he asked me if I'm familiar with his new Sefer on Chinuch, which I wasn't. And so he says, I'll send it to you. So immediately the next day or 2 days later, I get not one copy, but 3 copies of Rabbi Glatstein's Sefer on Chinuch called V'Zakeni L'Gadel, and start reading it. And it is an amazing Sefer. I was really taken by it. Rabbi Glatstein's style in general, for those who don't know, as if there is someone who listens to the podcast who doesn't know Rabbi Yehuda Glatstein's Shiurim, but they're very clear. His humor is great, very subtle, but excellent, very clear, very relevant, and well prepared, well thought out, and hits the mark. So you could check him out on Torah anytime. He has thousands and thousands and thousands of Shiurim there, and just so excellent. And he has Seferim, and he has books that are in English from Art Scroll on Yom Tovim. He has so much and so great stuff. So anyway, I asked Gedalia, cousin Gedalia, can you connect me, right, guys? And I'd love to interview him about the Sefer, about his thoughts on Chinuch, because the Sefer is excellent. The ideas are unique and thoughtful, and I thought that would be great. And right away, of course, he was so kind to connect me. And so here is my interview with the famous Rabbi Yehuda Glatstein. And it takes us a while to get to the Chinuch part, I have to say, because I was quite interested in knowing who he was and where he came from. And I guess for those of you who listen to Chinuch Today, you know my style. I'm always very interested in the guests and their background and how they came to what they are doing. So with Rabbi Glatstein, that certainly was something of interest to me. Who is this remarkable teacher of Torah, and how did he get into it? So we do that for about a half an hour, and then we get into the Sefer. We really just scratch the surface of this Sefer. I mean, I took 1 or 2 aspects of it and, discussed it a little, but there is so much there. And so at the end of this episode, I am so excited to share with you a contest in which you could be a proud owner of V'Zakeni L'Gadol and get your very own copy as a gift from the Chinuch Today podcast. So listen up, enjoy hearing Rabbi Yehuda Glatstein, and enjoy the Chinuch messages he has to share. Hello and welcome to another episode of Chinuch Today. We have a special visitor today, a Chashuv Rav, Rabbi Yehuda Glatstein, who's the Rav of Kehila Tiferes Mordechai in Cedarhurst, New York, and is a major Marbitz Torah. Rabbi Glatstein, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you so much for having me, Rabbi Garfield.
So it's interesting. I didn't even know you were a Rav. Tell us you're the Rav of the Kehila Tiferes Mordechai. Tell us a little about that shul.
Okay, Kehila Tiferes Mordechai. So just for starters, I have had other positions of Rabbanos before I started my own shul in Cedarhurst. And I would say there are 2 basic models of Rabbanos in America today. where either you're hired or you start your own shul. And many Rabbanim advised me that the optimal and ideal model of Rabbanos is where the Rav is what we call self-employed. And for a very simple reason that in terms of the values that you try to give over to the Kehillah, so if you're working for the Kehillah, then you're somewhat, or if not significantly, limited
Mm.
in the values you could give over, depending on what they're willing to receive and accept. In other words, in terms of decorum, in terms of direction, in terms of just the way certain things are given over. And in a situation where the Rav, it's his, so to speak, it's his house, then you could give over more knesinasai misinai, and then people realize that these are the terms of entrance in a certain sense. So many rabbanim have advised me to do that, and it's not every individual could really pull it off, as you say, because even in what we call self-employed shul, you're very much dependent on the membership, even though it's your own place, because look, you still need what you call customers. You
Right,
still need people to come,
right.
but it's in a certain sense like a more courageous type of rabbanos, especially, the different models of community, depending on whether people are yeshiva educated or more beginners. And actually, often yeshiva educated kehilais are more challenging because people they know the ropes, and sometimes it could pose a resistance to the values that are being given over. So for me personally, it's a more rewarding model of Rabbana. So yeah, I'm a Rav in Cedarhurst, New York.
How
We
long
have
have
a
you been there
very
for?
a beautiful kehillah,
How long have
growing
you been there
kehillah.
for?
I'm in this shul 4
Yeah.
years.
Is there anything else that you do besides the Rabbanis that you'd want to talk about or mention right now? Besides, we're going to get into the Chinuch and the opportunity of why we're talking. But in terms of your bio, just I'd like to give a brief idea of who you are so everyone knows you're a Rav. Is there anything else that you'd mention that maybe you do or
Yeah, so probably maybe for your audience, more people would be familiar with me not from my Rabbanos, because that's limited to the people in my neighborhood.
Mm.
But for many years now, I've been very punctilious and careful to try to record all my shiurim and make it available on various platforms, because it's a way of expanding Rabbanos. And actually, it's something that plays a major role in a lot of the activities I'm involved in. Let's say, for example, in terms of choosing shuls, even in terms of what type of shul to lead. So, obviously you want to have the greatest influence on people you can. So if you could have a shul with 100 people, you could influence more people than a shul with 50 people. But we live in a different world today because of the various tools of technology. So a share you give in front of 10 people is really available to the whole world. Like a great Rav once told me, in today's day and age, you could sit in your Daled Amos and literally, with Harbatzas Torah, with the tools available today, you could reach the whole world. So on the one hand, if you have a big shul, you could influence so many more families. But very often those responsibilities that you have on a social level for life cycle events, limit the Harbatzas Torah you could be involved in. If, let's say, you're involved in a smaller shul, but through the various platforms, you could literally reach a much wider audience. So I give a number of shiurim, and they're recorded and they're put on various platforms, like you mentioned, on the internet, and that's another, call it another dimension of my Rabbanos, so Harbatzas Torah, so the shiurim, whether it's in my shul, whether it's in other shuls in my neighborhood, or whether it's speaking engagements in the tri-state area, nationally, and even beyond that.
Wonderful. I've definitely, people have gotten to know a lot of your Torah and it's very well received. I could just say that.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
So let's go back a little and tell our listeners like where you came from, where did you grow up, and what led you to this life of Harbatzas Torah. So where'd you grow up?
Okay, so I grew up in a country, maybe a continent you could call it, called Brooklyn.
Whoa.
Yeah.
Okay, out of town.
Brooklyn, New
Well,
York.
today it's out of town. It probably was in town.
Flatbush, actually.
Okay.
Flatbush. Avenue M and East 31st Street. I learned in Yeshiva Tar Tamima for elementary school. But in most of my yeshiva years, I was in the Chavetz Chaim network of yeshivas, Chavetz Chaim of Brooklyn for high school, and for 1 year base medrash. Then I learned in Eretz Yisrael for a short while, for about 6, 7 months, which is most people spend more time in Eretz Yisrael, but that's just how the Chavetz Chaim network at the time worked for me. And then I was in what is called the mothership, the main Chavetz Chaim branch, RSA, Rabbinical Seminary of America, or Chavetz Chaim of Queens. I had this chus to learn by Rav Henoch Leibowitz, Zecher Tzaddik Lebracha.
Wow.
At the time, Rav David Harris was brought in to be like a second Rosh Hashiva, as well as Rabbi Grumblatt. I had this chus to learn by Rav Henoch in his very last year. He gave Shiur. Rav Henoch was my Mesader Kedushin.
Wow.
He was the standak of my oldest son. So I had that privilege.
You're the last dar there, the last chevra.
Yeah. And
Very
Rav
special.
Henoch was a Talmud of his father, Rav David Leibowitz, who, as many consider, the primary disciple of the Alter of Slabodka. And Chavetz Chaim has a very significant Slabodka influence. I mean, the yeshiva considers themselves the closest model to what Slabodka was. Obviously, the Alter had many Talmidim, and many of the yeshivas in America are offshoots of Slabodka, but Yeshiva Chavetz Chaim considers itself, in terms of ideology and methodology, the closest to Slabodka. And from my understanding, what Slabodka is, they're probably correct in terms of their view of the world, in terms of their view of man, in terms of also their emphasis on Musar.
I was going to say,
No.
could you unpack that a little? What would you say are the characteristics that are unique to the modern day Yeshiva Chavetz Chaim system, and that you're able to link directly to the Slabodka model?
Look, like I mentioned, the Alter had many Talmidim, and they're all very different. And one of the defining characteristics of Slabodka was their emphasis on Gadlus HaAdam, on the nobility of man, the greatness of man, and man's individuality. That's why the Alter had so many different Talmidim. However, in the way Slabodka operated, the methodology that's probably closest to what was done there is probably Yeshiva Chavetz Chaim. First of all, in an external sense, the yeshiva world has a very strong emphasis on being yeshivish. There's a certain ideology of the importance of being yeshivish, which means that in terms of dress and practice, an emphasis on demonstrating that you belong to the yeshiva and you're made out of different material, and that your allegiance and your belief system is separate from the nations of the world. And whether that displays itself in, only white shirts and a certain mode of dress or a certain type of hat or payas, that's a very strong feature of the yeshiva world today. And Slabodka not only did not emphasize that, but de-emphasize that. In the ideology of Slabodka, the dress, the mode of dress, was not to show you belong to the yeshiva. The mode of dress was to show the dignity of man, what they would call it conservative elegance, which is not practiced really at all in the yeshiva world today. But it's something that Chavetz Chaim definitely emphasized. It's still prevalent today. In my time, I'm dating myself, the Bachrim, even in Kailo, did not necessarily wear, only white shirts. But even in that sense, Yeshiva Chavetz Chaim dresses more like the mainstream yeshiva world. And just for the listeners to understand, Yeshiva Chavetz Chaim is a part of the yeshiva world in terms of it's a Haredi yeshiva. They have full allegiance to Gedolei Yisrael and align themselves with the general viewpoint of the Olam HaYeshivas. It's just a matter of style in terms of what they call de-emphasis on chitzonios. I think that's the nekuda.
Is that the primary aspect that you'd say connects?
No, this is not the defining characteristic of Chavetz Chaim, but just on an external basis, in
Give
terms of
us one more, 'cause
identification. You see a guy walking down the street, you see two guys walking down the street, and we wanted to identify which one is learning in BMG and which one is learning in Chavetz Chaim. So the BMG student Talmud would have the look of a yeshiva man, what we call yeshiva shaluk. And then Chavetz Chaim, they have maybe also a distinctive branding.
We
And
call it
that's
J.C. Penney in the world. I'm joking. Continue.
yeah, and that's really the influence of Slobodka. If you look in the
Mm.
old time pictures of even the Gedolei Rosh Hashivas who started, whether it's Chaim Berlin, whether it's Tarvadas or Ner Yisrael, they had a certain look. It was a very sharp, blazer with a
Yeah.
white pant and a certain kind of tie. Well, Chavetz Chaim tried to preserve that. In other words, it's not the type of colored shirt or dress which is important. It's more the de-emphasis on chitzanios because every emphasis is a de-emphasis on something
Hmm.
else. So if somebody is focusing on looking from, that automatically brings a de-emphasis on what we call the ikarim, whether it's Yira Shamayim, Anivos, and other midos taivas.
I had a funny thing happen to me.
Yeah.
I'm now, my listeners know, but you might not. I am now producing pictures of Gedolim when they're kids and when they're adults and comparing them. I have Rav Henoch, of course. I have about 80 different Gedolim, actually. So I'm very into this right now. A picture of them when they were young and a picture of them as adults, and I'm selling them to schools.
That's
So
interesting.
I brought it to the Torah Masorah convention, and I'm very close to a lot of Manalim and Lakewood and other places. They
Mhm.
said they can't put up such a picture. He looks too cool. The Gedolim looked too cool, and they were kids. They had hair, and they had a little chup, and they were wearing cool clothing. They said they wouldn't understand it today. It's funny that
While you can understand that, I think there's a danger of revisionist history because they're going to be exposed to this. You can't keep them. By the way, just in the news today, right? They came out that there was a guy who has not seen a human face in 40 years, and he just showed up to his son's wedding as he's a big tzaddik, and they were playing. What's the song they play when a gadol comes in
was
again?
a Rola Tzaddik or
Uh, you know, um, that they play when the Rosh Hashiva is dancing
mm,
with the chassan, whatever it is. But they still don't know who this guy is, and who says he's a tzaddik? Maybe he's a criminal. Who knows who this guy is? I mean, it's revisionist history. People
right?
have to know what the reality of life was 50 years ago. I mean, and to hide that, to make kids think today that every gadol looks like you know, Rosh Koilel today.
I
It's
mean, that's part of the project, right? Is to show them that they were children. But I thought that was an interesting response. They had too
yeah,
much hair. You should see some of the pictures. I mean, some of them, especially the Chevra and the Chevra, were very, they look cool.
right. So I would say Chafetz Chaim, so to speak, was the last of the Mohicans in that sense.
Hmm.
And I'll just say from my experience that there's a lot to be said for that. And like we said, every de-emphasis is an emphasis on important things. And in the yeshiva, there was a great emphasis on Liman HaMusar, which is we really spent a lot of time working on Mesilas Yesharim, Chayvus Habava, Shari Tshuva, Sefer Cheshbon HaNefesh, Archas Sadikim, and other classic Nefesh HaChaim, Taimar Devoira, but not just learning it to be. I mean, look, some yeshivas don't have Musar Seder, others do, and in Chavetz Chaim it was one of the Ikarim, and not only that, there were shmuzin, and you worked on Chachmas HaMusar, and that's one feature of the yeshiva that came from Slobodka. And another very important aspect is the yeshiva's emphasis on Harbatzas HaTorah, which is also, let's call it, an endangered species as a value in the Torah world today.
Correct.
And not only should it not be endangered, it really should be the most important value that's given over in yeshivas, because after all, Lilmoid is only half of the game. It's a Lilmoid or Lilamed. That's the mitzvah of Talmud Torah. Someone who says they're just going to learn. Imagine if somebody says they'll just learn and they won't keep. Imagine if someone said, I'm going to learn Torah, I'm going to sit and learn, but I'm not going to keep the mitzvahs. Say, he's not learning.
Right.
The mitzvah is Lilmoid, Lilamed, Lishrav Lassos.
Lassos.
How can you not do Lassos? That's not Limud. That's not Torah. Torah is Lassos. And what happened to Torah as a Lamed? What happened
Wow.
to that? What happened to the Marsha? Marsha Bab Metzia says that Reb Chia didn't just teach 5 Talmidim, Chamisha Chumshe Torah, and 6 Talmidim, Shisha Sidrei Mishnah. He gave to each one Chumash and 1 Mishnah for them to give over to others. So the Marsha says so that each one could be not only a loimed but a malamed also.
Wow.
And there's a lot to talk about on
Yeah.
this.
Beautiful.
Of course, the Chassam Sofer has a Hakdama to Yoredeya, where the Chassam Sofer says that Chassam Sofer writes that Avraham Avinu made a decision that God has enough angels in this world that if he's just going to sit in his tent and work on himself, so what's he adding to this world? Another malach? God has millions of malachim already. But what about man? So Avraham Avinu gave up of his ruchnias to teach the world. I recently was having a conversation with one of the leading Rosh Yeshivas in the Olam HaYeshivas, and I was telling him all of this rhetoric, and I was challenging, that this value, and Slabodka focused on this very much. They sent out their Talmidim to start other yeshivas,
Right.
and he was saying it's hard for people to find jobs, but I was pointing out maybe in the tri-state area it's hard to find jobs, or in the concentrated frum communities. But if 9 out of 10 Jews in the world don't know the pasuk Shema Yisrael Hashem Elokeinu Hashem Echad, isn't Lalamed very much in need today?
Mm-hmm.
So the next day, somebody told me that this Rosh Yeshiva spoke at a Chanukas Habayis of a different yeshiva, and he said over this whole Chassam Sofer and the importance of Lalamed. So I was happy.
You're making an impact.
And I know Rav Aaron Kotler very much sent out many Talmidim in his time to be Malamed. And moreover, Rav Aaron was very Mekusha with the Torah, the Chassam Sofer. He was afraid even to challenge the Chassam Sofer in learning. Even if the Chassam Sofer learned the sugya a certain way. So again, everyone has to follow their Rabbeim, but I'm just pointing out this ideology of the importance of Habratzas HaTorah is really the traditional viewpoint of Gedolei Yisrael throughout the generations. I mean, just to put out there, Rav Itzla Petterberg writes in his biography on Rabbi Yisrael Salanter that Rabbi Yisrael, in the pinnacle of his chachma, was trying to identify what is the path that HaKadosh Baruch Hu is looking for. So he said, maybe I should perfect myself. So Rabbi Yisrael went into his Dalet Amos and he was working on himself, and he says he realized, no, this is not what God wants. Someone who has ability, someone who has talent, someone who has Torah knowledge, he's obligated to use it and to share it and to help Klal Yisrael. I mean, we're one nation. One of the Mesilas Yesharim says, one of the main purposes of doing mitzvahs is to be mezakeh Klal Yisrael. So that's, even when you put on tefillin, one should be mechavein, that one wants their hanochas tefillin to be an elevation to all of Klal Yisrael, especially those who don't know about it. But if you have the ability, and who learned in yeshiva doesn't have the ability to share what they learned with someone else? You don't have to be a professional speaker. You don't have to be an inspirational speaker. The same way, if you have a good deal on a credit card, you're going to share it with your friend. So if you know how to wear tefillin and you know how to learn Torah, how can you not share it? So this is a very important ideology of the yeshiva. This is a strong influence of Slabodka. And moreover, was one more thing. Rav Pam was a Talmud of Rav David Leibowitz. Rav Pam wrote a classic tribute to Rav David, and in there's something that's very beautiful, where Rav Pam said that Rav David taught that the crowning achievement of a lamdan and someone who has a connection to the art of Torah study, the crowning achievement is being a malamed and a marbitz Torah. So in many circles, the honor of teaching Torah is lost. It's like, what do you do? Oh, what do you mean? I'm learning. So you're chashiv. And what do you do? I'm a rebbe in yeshiva. So you didn't make it. No, Reb David taught, Slabodka taught, teaching Torah is the crowning achievement in Torah.
Beautiful. As a mechanech, I appreciate what you're a mechanech out of town, no less.
Yeah.
I'm very far from Queens,
Yeah.
So I get all the points.
So I just started off by telling you about my yeshiva career, but I have other influences. If just
I'd love to know. I was going to say what happened next, or what were the other.
So you was what happened to me, right?
Yeah.
So
now you're
okay,
weddings. You finished yeshiva, and
so I have many influences. First of all, I have revered grandparents on both sides of my family who I have the zechus to know, to learn from, to observe. I even saw great-grandparents.
Mm. Wow.
My grandparents, my father's father was a Rav in Pittsburgh for 70 years, was a Holocaust survivor, someone who learned by Gedolei Yisrael before the war. He was a Talmud Muvak of Menachem Zemba, Rav Shlomo David Kahana, Ger Rebbe. He was Tzaddik Yisoid Olam in his own right, in terms of his personal hanhaga, in terms of his midos, in terms of his kedusha. Somebody who gave his life to take care of elderly people in Pittsburgh, to care for them as a Rav, as a chaplain. And my grandfather, my grandparents, my grandmother was a daughter of the last Rav of Sachachev, so my grandparents were a very big influence on my life. And, they came from Polish royalty, Polish Hasidus. So that's a part of my influence, which is different than what you call, the Olam HaYeshivas, different than the Olam HaYeshivas from Lita.
Right.
But this was really Polish Hasidus, Polish royalty. My mother's parents were, my grandfather was a very great tzaddik in his own right. He was a working person, but someone who had genuine Yiras Shamayim and Avas Yisrael and Avas HaTorah, and was a great Baal Chesed. So these were influences on me, very deep and very profound influences on me. My father was a practicing attorney, but as a volunteer, he spoke on behalf of Eshat Torah Discovery, and he gave over the Discovery program to audiences all over the world. So this is as a volunteer and pro bono, and he had a tremendous influence on hundreds, probably thousands of people who came closer to Torah mitzvahs through his presentations. And that also exposed me to Jews of all stripes and all affiliations and all levels of background. And also my father would speak to them about my grandparents' experiences in the Holocaust, which really left a very deep impression on many Jews. And many of these Yidden who had never heard about Torah Misinai or Shema Yisrael or about God, after hearing these presentations, many of them would commit not to intermarry or to take steps to becoming Shomer Shabbos. And over the years, we met many of them who came to full observance.
Wow.
So, these were all very powerful influences in my life. Toward the end of my yeshiva career, I developed relationships with Harav Avigdor Miller, Zechat Tzaddik Livracha. I used to go to his shul, speak to him, so that was also an influence, as well as Harav Noach Isaac Obam, who I learned a lot about Rabbanus from davening in his shul, from speaking to him, from learning from him. So this,
Beautiful.
all of these individuals and personalities and experiences, all I'm grateful for.
Wow, that is such a special treat that you had that kind of relationship with so many of your ancestors. We want to get to the Sefer, but let's try to bridge that gap. So you finished Koilo and Chafetz Chaim.
So Chafetz Chaim is quite a long program. You
Right.
know, the standard program is about a couple of years and then 7 years after you're married.
Right.
And I basically did that whole thing. I learned about 10 years.
So during that time, did you have an idea of that you wanted to be a Rav or that you were beginning to give Shiurim? Like, how did you get from there to where you are today?
So it developed very slowly and gradually, and I started giving Shiurim in the shul I grew up on. I used to give Shiurim once a year on Shavuos night, and I would prepare for weeks and months for that one shiur. And first of all, people see me, people hear me regularly, and they think that I'm this outgoing and bubbly and charismatic speaker. And I'm shy. And it was very difficult for me to speak in public. I was very nervous about it. Physiologically nervous about it. And it just developed, sometimes you really have capacity and ability that you don't even realize. Sometimes a person is afraid to do something or nervous to do something. And it's amazing what the ability a person could have if they
Yeah. So what happened? You started giving Shiurim.
Okay, so I started giving Shiurim in different shuls. I used to give a 5-minute dvar halacha. I remember it's like a 2-minute dvar halacha. I would prepare 3 hours a day for like a 3-minute dvar halacha. I started then Rabbi Teitz's shul in Kew Hills. I was giving a shir in the Young Israel. I know you're friendly with Rabbi Schoenfeld, so Rabbi Schoenfeld's grandfather and then father, Rabbi Fabian Schoenfeld, Rabbi Yoel Schoenfeld, they were the Rabbi of the Young Israel of Kew Hills. I was giving a shir there for Balabatim, and people enjoyed it. I worked very hard to prepare for it, and people appreciate when the Maggid Shur, the Rav, puts in a lot of time to prepare the shir. They feel like they're getting their time's worth, and the Rav is machshav their time, and people really enjoyed it. And a shul, a job in a shul in the neighborhood opened up, and people told me, throw your hat in the mix. And I was pretty young at the time, and somehow I threw my hat in the mix. And next thing I know, they called me for a praba. I did a good job with the drasha, and I got the job. And
Wow.
that's how the Rabbanos began. But the Shiurim were not on any kind of platform. And when I started, maybe there were like 7 guys sitting around the table. I would give a shir. We would serve some rugelach, and that was a good shir, And then one day I bumped into somebody, and he's like, why aren't you recording your shiurim? I said, what, on a digital recorder? He's like, no, a camera. I said, camera? And what do I do with it? He said, you're going to put it on the internet. I said, what's internet? He said, what? You don't have internet? I said, pal, I've never been on the internet in my life. Not only that, I had never been on a computer in my life.
Wow.
Seriously. Even though I took computers in high school, but I figured out that the teacher would give 100 questions with the answers, and like the test was 20 of the questions. So I would memorize the questions and the answers, and I never actually went on a computer. I had never been on the internet. I know everybody was, yelling, it's usher, it's treif. So I stayed away. I didn't know what it was. I thought it was,
Right.
who knows what. I mean, obviously, it has its dangers.
It's dark side.
And I slowly started putting the shiurim up, and I would get feedback from different places. People are listening, people are like it, people are recommending it. More and more people are listening. And at first, I was only recording 1 shir a week. I was recording the big Parsha shir of the week, and it took me years to realize, okay, you're giving a Gemara shir to 3 people, 5 people, 7 people, 10 people. Why not record it? You never know. And slowly, I record one more, another one. And now it's like, if I'm giving a shir, it's mamish chaval not to record the shir.
Right.
It's,
How many shiurim do you give a week now, would you say? Lots.
Many shiurim, yeah.
Yeah. And most of them end up available for the Olam?
Yeah, Kamat, they're all available. Unless sometimes, I'm hired to give a shir and they want it to be exclusive
Uh-huh.
for them. So, under those circumstances.
Got it.
But yeah,
Wonderful.
yeah.
Wonderful. Okay, and I know you have a few svarim, and you came out with some art scroll svarim, which are beautiful on Yom Tif, and you have on Hanukkah even. I have it here. But I want to talk to you about the Sefer you recently came out on, called V'Zakeni L'Gadel, which is on Chinuch.
Yes.
And I guess I'll start by asking you, why did you write a Sefer on Chinuch?
Why did I write a Sefer on Chinuch? You know who asked me that question? My kids. Like, why are you writing a Sefer on Chinuch?
That's great.
What do you know about Chinuch? I say, you taught me a lot. Why do I say on Chinuch? Well, first of all, I wanted to learn about it. So I started giving shiurim about it because I found that many people who write or speak about Chinuch pull things out of a hat, meaning they totally make it up. They invent it. They'll say ideas that sound reasonable, and they may be, or they may not be. These are their ideas and suggestions. And I said to myself, Chinuch is a subject in Torah. Surely the Torah has what to say about it. And even though you'll find smatterings of ideas here and there, but I wanted to really research the topic from what legitimate, significant lessons we could learn from Chumash Bereshis, from classic Mefarshim, from Gedolei Yisrael, and organize it like a sugya, like a real topic. Now, obviously, it requires a lot of seichel hayashar and a lot of common sense and experience, which is part of seichel, to hone in of how it's going to apply in our times. But the basis has to be the Das Torah, but Das Torah meaning classic Makairos in Torah, in Shas, in Poskim, in Chazal. How do Chazal view Chinuch, the responsibility of a father? Primarily, what is the Torah viewpoint of the type of relationship a parent should have with a child? And what I discovered are very surprising. It shouldn't be surprising, but people find it surprising.
Yeah,
And I know you took a look
absolutely.
at the Sefer, so
Absolutely. We're going to get to that. But before that, tell me a little more about the methodology. Like you type chinuch into Otzer Chachma and just went
no, no,
through
no. So again, like I
like,
told you, today though, I do have Otzar Chachma, but that's not at all the methodology of how the Sefer came together and how I present Shiurim. The methodology is that over the years of learning and learning from Svarim and just trying to learn as much as I could about Chinuch Abanim and collecting the information and giving it over in Shiurim, so I wanted to organize in a systematic manner what Chazal say, what Gedolim wrote, and I'm not just talking about today. I'm talking about classic sources from 1,000 years ago. What does Rashi say about Chinuch? What does the Chassam Sofer say about Chinuch? What does the Chida say about Chinuch? Now, obviously, we're going to hone it and use our Gedolim of today to learn how to apply it, but it has to be Torah based in that sense. And if you really study even classic Rashis, you're going to see very seemingly innovative, progressive ideas about Chinuch Abanim. That maybe if you would ask people, who do you think says this idea? They would say, I don't know. I mean, maybe a Rebbe today in 2024, 2024 we're still in, right? Maybe this will appear in 2025, I think. The truth is, these are age-old ideas, ideologies, techniques, and methods.
beautiful. You didn't really explain the methodology fully. Like you said, you wanted to learn about chinuch. Okay.
Yeah.
So you said now you opened the Chumash and you said, let's find where chinuch ideas come up in Chumash and then look through the Mefarshim on those psukim. Or you just have been collecting it for years, and when things would come up, you would like mark it and put it in a
So I would
box.
say more as follows. I would say I sat down. I said, okay, I want to give a shiur about the Torah's viewpoint of the relationship between father and son. And then I said, okay, I remembered, oh, that amazing Chassam Sofer, he's talking about this.
Mm.
And that Chida, he's talking about this. And that Rav Nosson Adler, he's speaking about this. And that Rav Shimon Schwab, so to speak,
So you had in your
I
mind already Makaros that you just sort of
I had
brought.
yeah, I had filed away in my
Got it.
mind from
Okay.
years. I just had to identify the subject, and then, so to speak, the marmakomis that I had in my mind
Because
sort
I
of were
wonder,
drawn to that.
Rabbi Glatstein, I know the tremendous chiddush, which is not a chiddush, but the reawakening of what you're sharing and the power of it. But I wonder if someone couldn't write a sefer that looks very similar with totally different conclusions, finding different chazals to support that. That's why I'm asking you.
Again, based on my humble learning, if I would have come across legitimate sources contrary to that, I would have presented it.
Uh-huh. Oh, interesting.
And
Okay.
I did not.
Really? Okay.
For example, there's a topic, should a parent hit a child? Obviously, in our generation, that's very frowned upon. Okay? But there are various viewpoints in the Gedolim, and I brought the opinion of Rabbi Avad Yosef, of Reb Chaim Kanievsky, of Avram David Goldberg of Telz. I brought all the opinions, and then tried to offer an approach for our times, taking into account all of these viewpoints. But in terms of the relationship between parent and child, I humbly assert that I did not find a dissenting opinion to this element of the presentation.
Really? Wow. That's
Yeah.
fascinating.
And
Well,
I would be surprised if there really was one, considering that the relationship that of parent and child that I portrayed, it comes from Chassam Sofer, who is an Orthodox rabbi. Reb Nosson Adler also had the same type of, also Orthodox rabbi. The Chida, Chaim Yesodot Azulai. Rashi, the Sefer Hasidim, which is considered a very strict,
Chafetz Chaim.
Chafetz Chaim himself, Rav Shimon Schwab, Rav Shach. So, starting from Sefer Hasidim and Rashi, Rishonim, I'm saying these are the Gdolis Ho Asher Mipi Amanu Chaim. You know, Chasam Sofer, the Chida, the Chafetz Chaim. I mean, and to our times, Ram Gamliel Rabinovich. So I would be surprised if somebody presented me with a viewpoint of a Gadol contrary to that. I mean, I wouldn't be shocked, but I feel that this approach is very, very firmly documented and established. Wow.
Okay, so now the moment we've been waiting for. Help our listening audience understand a synopsis of what you mean when you say that you've presented the ideal relationship between parent and child.
Again, and I want to emphasize that I also spoke to great people today about this, who also concur. Namely Rav Pinchas Friedman, Shvilei Pinchas, who very much is a proponent of this. And that is the proper relationship between parent and, let's call it, mature child, grown child, teenager, is a relationship of friendship. It's a relationship of friendship. The yachas between father and son, mother and daughter, it's a relationship of friendship. And in that context, there can be successful transmission of ideals and values. But as, so to speak, authority, it does not go down. The source of this idea, Rav Shimon Schwab brings from simple Rashi in this coming week's Parsha, where Yosef reveals himself to the brothers, and the brothers are astonished, the brothers are speechless, and Yosef says, don't sweat it. Paroi made me his father. What? What does that mean? That Yosef's Paro's father? So Rashi translates, what does Av mean? Av means l'chaver or l'patroin, friend and supporter. Says Rav Shimon Schwab, Rashi is defining the role of father. The role of father, the role of parent is not mentor, guide, instructor, mashgiach. The role of father is friend, supporter. Friend and supporter. That is a definition. Says Reb Schwab, if you want a barometer of how well of a job you're doing as a parent, just ask yourself one simple question. Am I my child's best friend in the world? And that's a very powerful question.
But don't we have to say no? Don't we have to put limits on our child and say no to them? And a friend wouldn't do that. A friend says, do whatever you want. I don't care.
Okay, good question. So first of all, not a good friend. A lousy friend is going to hang out with you, and when he sees you doing something wrong, what does he care? No sweat off his back. But that's not a real friend. That's the two people are just leeching off each other. They want to have a good time, and nobody wants to put any limits. A good friend would say, hey, you're in a compromised situation right now. Give me the keys. I'm driving home. That's a real friend. A real friend is going to set you straight. So this is not at all a liberal perspective on parenthood. This is not to say the parent doesn't have to make sure the kid doesn't go to sleep on time, that the kid is not involved in taking harmful substances. This doesn't mean that a parent shouldn't make sure the kid has good influences in life, has good practices, has healthy habits, that the kid is doing homework, that the kid is studying.
So that's going to be a stare to this friendship, because to the extent that you assert yourself and try to push your child in the way that you're speaking, often teenagers or other individuals, even if it's a colleague, resent that. They say, what do you give me a hard time about what time I go to sleep for? Let me go to sleep when I go to sleep. What? You're no friend of mine.
So when the kid sees that you have a relationship of friendship means, let's develop that. It means that you understand who they are. You understand their unique personality. You understand their challenges. You understand their talent. You understand they like sports. They don't like sports. They like art. They like you like music. They understand your taste for food. They understand what your preferences are, and you appreciate them as a person, and you value their opinion, and you value their view. So they see that you have a relationship, a friendship. In that context, you could guide them accordingly in a friendly manner. So can instruction be a conflict to stress-free interaction? It could be. But it doesn't necessarily have to be a conflict to your friendship, because after all, you're telling them to go to bed. You don't say, go to bed now because I said so. That's authoritarian. But you say, hey, I see you had a hard day. It was hard for you to concentrate in school, and for your benefit, you really have to do well on your tests. And, you want to be successful in life. So you want to be at full capacity in school. So it's a good idea to start winding down and, hit the sack now, because, you'll be much more productive, and you'll feel better tomorrow. So that's, instead of being an authority, it's you're being a wise, older, caring friend.
I hear. Okay. I mean, in practice, there's a lot of nuances on how
Oh
to.
yeah, and believe me, I'm trying to figure it out. Every day I struggle.
Okay.
Try to,
Especially with teenagers who are not interested in your friendship at all. They're interested in your money. They're interested in your enabling, but not so much your friendship.
I heard about that. You see, I don't, my kids are perfect, so I don't have any challenges. But I did hear that there are children out there that could be a little challenging.
Right.
Yeah. So
Let me ask
to,
you this. I'm going to ask you a provocative question.
yeah.
I'm curious what you'd say. I
I
was,
could
as I
choose not to
mentioned.
answer it.
Yeah, you'll have to see. I mean, we're friends, so I would encourage you to answer it, but it's up to
Right.
you. I was looking through the Sefer, very much enjoying it, as I mentioned, and there's a lot of references to the relationship between Avram and Yishmael and Yitzchak and Esau. And I'm wondering, would you say that Avram was an effective parent to Yishmael, and that Yitzchak was an effective parent with Esau? Were they like good parents, and that's someone we should be looking to for advice? Because one could argue that they were only 50% successful as parents, which is not necessarily the person we look to for advice.
Okay, so here is a very important hashkafa, and there's a very strong hashkafa from Slabodka and in Yeshiva, that we are not authorized to critique not only the avos, we can't critique Chazal, and we can't critique Gedolei Yisrael. To be purest, to start saying, well, look what happened to Esav. So, they obviously, maybe they didn't do a good job over there. We're not authorized to do that. Unless Chazal themselves pointed out, then we're given license to study from that and avoid it.
Okay, the only issue I have, and I want you to follow up with the Chazal, is though, but we could look to them for the positive in ways that we find new, right? We just can't look at the
Correct.
negative. So
Correct.
we could say,
no, we can't invent that. Oh, the reason why Yishmael didn't come out good, or Esau, they must have done X wrong or Y wrong, or this thing that they said they must have made a mistake. We're not allowed to do that. But if Chazal identify something and they say, the reason why this happened is because of that, then of course, so Chazal are highlighting to us what we could learn from. So I'll give you an example of that.
yeah,
There is a simple Rashi that most people overlook. It says that Vayigdalu Hana'arim. So
didn't take the time to understand his nature.
Yeah, so simply Rashi says, good. Simply
I was
Rashi
arguing on
says,
that Rashi, and there's a steer in art scroll between the old Schottenstein and the new elucidated. But go ahead. I was
Yeah.
mamish very excited by this. I'm
yeah. So
excited.
I think I always read Rashi that Rashi says, so long as they were young, nobody paid attention to what path they were taking, and when they became old, Yaakov went to his path and Esau went to his path. And I always read Rashi, look, when they were young, nobody just bothered to pay attention.
Right.
But Shamshin Falhirsch understands that what Rashi is saying is that Chazal are identifying a mistake in the Chinuch of Yaakov and Esav, that they didn't exert themselves enough to understand the nature of Esav, that Esav cannot be a kid who's forced to be in the yeshiva the whole day. He needed more of an outlet in the outside world. That's how Rav Shamshon Hirsch understands what Rashi is saying. So then we're entitled to say that from here we learn that it is incumbent upon a parent to recognize the unique nature of a child and realize that just because Yeshiva Ateres Tzvi worked for the oldest kid, well, the oldest kid is very studious, and he could sit in the yeshiva for 8 hours, and he could be happy and successful. But if you send Shimon to Ateres Tzvi, it's going to be a disaster. He can't sit in front of a Rebbe who just teaches the Mishnah all day. He needs extracurricular activity. And if you send Shimon to Ateres Tzvi, then don't expect a different outcome than what happened to Yaakov and Esav. So that's an example of where, according to Rav Shamshon Hirsch, Chazal identify a shortcoming in the chinuch of Yaakov and Esav. But for us on our own to say whether we think they're a good parent, that's not, we're not authorized to do that.
Or in your Sefer, you talk about Yitzchak's using the word b'ni with regard to the way he interacted with who he thought was Esav.
Yeah.
So, like, is that an example? I wasn't sure what to make of that because...
Oh, yeah. So that's, for example, let's say the Chidah says that the reason why the Torah does not call Yitzchak Yaakov's father, right? It says Elokei Avraham Avicha ve'Elokei Yitzchak.
Right.
So the Chidah brings from a Rishon something very powerful that the Torah did not consider Yitzchak Yaakov's father because Yitzchak would not tell Yaakov how much he loved him. He would just say Yaakov. No, you can't call your kid. That's a limud. You can't just call your kid Yaakov. You have to say Yaakov Shefala, Yaakov Zinashi, Yaakov, my dear honey, sweetie pie. If you don't do that, that's a limud you could learn. If a parent does not tell the kid how much they love him, they should put the kid up for adoption, and they forfeited their right to be the parent. That's what the Chidah says. That's what Chidah writes.
What's fascinating is, and tell me if I'm violating a hashkafic principle of Slobodka here.
Yeah.
But when Yaakov then raises his children in the beginning of Parsha Vayeshev, the contrast between the way he treats Yosef and the other brothers is so clear and so boilet that it's hard to imagine that he himself experienced this vis-a-vis Esav with his father, right? And then, in a way, because his father treated
Esav, the Gemara Megillah says, Al Yishan Adam ben Abadim. Chazal do say you have to treat all kids equally.
Which is not what he experienced himself in his own upbringing, based on what you just said from the Chidah. I'm not...
Right, so here's... My understanding is, if the Chidah says that there was a mistake, there was a mistake. If the Gemara says Yaakov made a mistake with this, there was a mistake. But now to start psychoanalyzing, why did Yaakov make a mistake? It's because... that we can't do.
No, I would think Adarabah, he would be less inclined to make a mistake.
Right.
But we can't even think that, I hear.
Right. I mean, right. I don't think my understanding is we could only, what Chazal have given us, what Gedol Yisrael have said.
Yeah.
So then
it's hard to stop your brain when you start trying to understand, because the lesson's only meaningful if you can relate to it, like obviously. So we try to relate to the situation and to a father and a son and 2 sons and 12 sons. And so it's hard to like limit your thinking, but I understand, the hashkafic requirement. I assume that parents or all people become very nervous when you talk about the need to treat your children so well and even to respect. You have this remarkable quote from Rabinovich's mother about the need for parents to respect their children. And it's hard not to see that as some kind of woke, modern way of thinking, where you're moving the balance of power from the parent as an authoritarian and as a person who must demand respect and really changing that dynamic.
Yeah, so that, that statement of Rav Gamliel has an amazing observation that the same way when God asks Abraham to go to the Akedah, he says, yeah, Hineni, here I am, whatever you want, lashon of humility. When Yitzchak says to his father, Abba, Avi, Abraham says, Hineni, here, behold, here I am, the same humility. And Rav Gamliel says, from here we learn, with the same humility you speak to Hashem, you have to speak to your children. And Rav Gamliel says, what we ask our kids to do today is no less than an Akedas Yitzchak. We ask them to give up the allure of the outside world and if we want to be successful in equipping them to do that, we have to value them and show them our humility to them and how much we respect them. And look, whether it sounds woke or it doesn't sound woke, that's what Rashi says, you know? And I know that Rav Pam once mentioned that the way his mother treated him, and he says a very important principle, that children are not influenced not by what you say and not by what you do, but how you act toward them
Hmm.
specifically. And Rav Pam would say over that his mother, the way she would ask the children for help, like, oh, I know you're very busy on Friday after a whole week of school, but Shabbos is coming, and I'm just wondering maybe you could lend a hand. That would be so appreciative, it would be so nice of you. I don't know if you have the time, but if you would, I would really, that kind of
Hmm.
request, and how she would speak to them with such fineness and purity, and make them feel like they were doing her the biggest favor in the world. This is Rav Pam's mother. We're talking about 100 years ago. And look what type of child she raised.
I wonder if Mr. Palm, Tati Palm, was in the room, okay? And Mommy Palm said to little Rabbi Avram, could you help me? And he said, for whatever reason, he hesitated. I'm Chas v'shalom, child would never do that, a gadol. But I'm a little tired. He wouldn't say, no, help your mother. She's asking for help. I would think that would be appropriate, for a father who's listening to this. Okay, the mother's treating him nice. So the father says, your mother's asking you to bring up the potatoes. Bring up the potatoes. No, you would think that they should all be like, all right, Avramchik, it's okay. Let your mother schlep it. Let her, it's fine. Let her do it. You're tired. I mean, what kind of parenting is that?
It almost seems like if you do it the right way,
But let's say he doesn't. He didn't fall for it. He didn't fall for the Glatstein special.
he didn't
So
fall. What do you do if you didn't fall for this Zakini Legado?
whatever. He had a hard day. He was distracted. He's not perfect. Children aren't born perfect. They have to learn things. So
Mhm.
he didn't really. He took his mother at face value, and he's like, all right, she doesn't need my help, or she recognizes I'm really tired. So what should the father do? He should let that go.
I don't know. You're gonna have to ask expert on this,
Okay,
What should the
fair
father
enough.
do?
It's just hard to imagine that. We don't want to train our children that it's not okay.
Probably what the father should do is probably help the mother, right?
Yeah, maybe.
That's what I would imagine. You want to know, is that what I do?
Okay. There are Chedushim, and I encourage people to read the Sefer. It's a beautiful Sefer. It's Rabbi Glatstein's style of great marmakomis, great questions, solid, very solid. I did notice in the Haskamas that there are two Haskamas for this Sefer, and the rest are just for your general series of Svarim.
Yeah.
And I'm wondering, and even the Haskamas that you have, so it's unclear if Rabbi Elia Brudny and Rabbi Elbaum actually read the words of the book, or they're just saying you're a good guy and this is another good book of yours. And I'm curious, for the Gedolim to actually read these, at least the first 5, 6 chapters. And have you had anyone actually read it of that stature, and what kind of response did you get? Because it really is a chiddush in a sense.
So I gave this sefer to Rav Obam and Rav Elia Brudny, and I'm sure they read every single word, and they spent months and months reviewing it, and they came back with a glowing endorsement of every single idea.
Really?
Yeah, probably. I'm sure they have nothing better to do than to
No, but
read
come
my
on, it's
sefer.
a serious
But
business.
but
This is serious stuff. Really,
I know that I gave the whole thing to Rav Obam, and he went through it very carefully, and he gave a very strong haskama. But specifically, Rav Elia Brudny, the beginning of the Sefer actually comes from a shiur that I heard from him,
right.
and I specifically gave over the beginning of the Sefer for him to look through carefully, and he told me that the Haskama he wants to include, and he included that it was written with Das Torah. So I guess that means
Wow.
it's Oiskehalten, as they
Wow.
say.
I hope I don't know if this is a bracha for you, but I think it is. I hope that really people read it and really think about it, and it starts a real, genuine dialogue around these issues. I have a feeling that it's not going to be makubal by everybody, but I think it's such a healthy conversation and an important conversation, especially for our dar. You have to really read it and understand the implications of what you're saying. It's not a klein azach. It's not a light thing. It's a very significant yesodistic thing.
I'll just end off that the Chavetz Chaim's son said that in terms of his relationship with his father, when people would see them walking in the street, they didn't know they were father and son because of the friendship that he had with his father. And furthermore, Rav Pinchas Friedman also shared with me that in our generation, the friendship is really the only viable, successful model of parenting in our times. Of course, you have to guide them in the right path. That's without question. And again, that's only one small part of the Sefer, but the Sefer really does describe at length many, many important aspects of parenting, not only the friendship aspect, but all the various values that you have to focus on and give over to your children.
Beautiful. How do people get the Sefer? What would be the best way?
Okay, so the best way to get the Sefer is go to the Svarim store and ask for a Sefer, V'zakeni Legadel, V'zakeni Legadel, which has a very big section on the importance of tefillah for one's children, as well as various skulos to be zoicha to the Banim Talmidei Chachamim, or you could go to our site, rabbidg.com, and order the Sefer with free shipping, and it will be in your house right away.
Unbelievable. Well, thank you, Rabbi Glatstein. I really appreciate it. And like I said, it's a remarkable Sefer and a real important statement about Chinuch and how we should treat our children, and really inspiring. So thank you so much.
Amen. Thank you for your time. Thank you for the opportunity, and I wish you bracha v'atzlacha.
Thank you so much. Well, I hope you enjoyed hearing Rabbi Glatstein, learning about his background, and hearing a little about his Sefer. Like he mentions, we only touched a very small part of it, but it's an excellent, excellent Sefer. And I find myself often pushing back on people, even when they say things I pretty much agree with, like in this case. But I find that we need to push back and speak out the objections that so many have in their mind. In this case, talking about respecting children and treating them like friends and not using authoritarian approaches to influence them just seems so foreign to so many. And I think that it's important to push back and let him have an opportunity to express himself. I got in a lot of trouble once doing that. So this is an opportunity for me to clear the air, make sure everyone knows my intentions. I was on a call about a year ago with Rabbi Daniel Kalish, who is the Rosh Yeshiva of the Waterbury Yeshiva, which is a yeshiva that works with Talmidim that haven't been so successful in the quote-unquote regular system. And his approach is one that's full of love and not a lot of pressure, not really pushing the kids by using negative energy and guilt and knasim and schmoozes that sort of speak to the negative side of motivation, but rather he gives a lot of space and accepts people for who they are and celebrates their achievement and prods them ever so gently. So when he was on the call and talking about his approach, I asked the question, and I said, Rabbi Kalish, I've been to Torah Masorah conventions for years. I'm involved with Chinuch, and I haven't heard that many people publicly say the things you're saying, publicly say that we need to change the tone that we use in schools and yeshivas from using negativity as a motivator would mean guilt and making people feel bad and giving them sort of negative musar and looking at them funny when they walk in late and giving them the eyes and all the things that those of us who are in the system know and feel very viscerally. So I haven't really heard anyone get up and say, Ad Khan, we really need to recognize that this is not the approach for this dar. And plenty of people have opportunities to say that. So I asked him, which Rosh Yeshiva, which modern day Gadol has endorsed his view that he could point to who has publicly spoken. Now, if you have an ear for it, you could hear it. It definitely comes up on a regular basis in questions and answers and in other things like that. But to get up and say, Rabbi Sai, Ad Khan, we really need to change, you don't really hear. There was one Rosh Yeshiva of Gershon Miller. He's not Rosh Yeshiva, but he's a very chashuv mechanech. He spoke about it once on Shabbos, not recorded, where he talked about that a little. But it's just not a common theme. So I was pushing Rabbi Kalish. I said, listen, if this mahalach is so healthy and appropriate, why don't we hear more about it? And he struggled with an answer a little. And in the end, he said, Rav Henoch Leibowitz, who was Rosh Yeshiva of Chavetz Chaim, spoke this way, and I pointed out that he hasn't been relevant voice at the Torah Convention for 20 years because he hasn't been there. He died and he was sick, and so to use that as an example is a little bit dated. Anyway, some of the Talmidim misinterpreted my pushing Rabbi Kalish as giving him a hard time and disagreeing with him, and that was not my intention at all. So let it be said on the Chinuch Today podcast, Season 3, Episode 9, that was not my intention at all. Rather, my intention was to prod Rabbi Kalish to have an opportunity to share his views and explain how it's consistent with Das Torah, which he did, and explain how it is something that we all need to embrace. And that was really my intention. So similarly here with Rabbi Glatstein, my intention in pushing him and expressing that voice to make sure that he's able to fully explain his shita and address those voices that are questioning it. And I say to all of you the same thing. Are we really ready to embrace this ideology? Do we really think that it's the way to go with the chinuch of our children? Easy to say, but if we really embrace it fully, what does that mean? What does that look like? And a whole nother aspect of it, which I didn't get into with him, is, okay, he's talking about fathers and sons, Avram, Yitzchak, Yaakov, and the way they treated their children. But what about Talmidim? Is that the same? Is that different? Are fathers and sons a different relationship than Rebbeim and Talmidim? Why yes, why no? So we didn't even get into that. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed it. And I really hope that those of you who would be interested are able to get the Sefer and learn it and think about it, reflect on it. And as I told him, I think it's a very important discussion. And to that end, we are going to be having a Chinuch Today podcast giveaway. And that is, anyone who sends me an email to chinuchtodaypodcast@gmail.com, chinuchtodaypodcast@gmail.com, with their favorite episode and why, just 1 or 2 sentences, will be entered to a raffle that will take place before the next episode airs. To win a copy of Rabbi Glatstein's Sefer sent to you, and you will be able to learn it and read it and enjoy it. So send that email, chinuchtodaypodcast@gmail.com, your favorite episode and why, and you'll be entered into a raffle to receive Rabbi Glatstein's new Sefer sent to you. I have to just say that this is only for people who live in the United States. I have, Baruch Hashem, many listeners around the world, and I don't think I will be able to mail it to Uzbekistan, Pakistan, China, Japan, or sadly, even Eretz Yisrael. So if you win and you live in Eretz Yisrael, you could direct it to someone in America. Wishing you well. Thank you so much for joining us. As I always tell my listeners, sharing is caring, so do not hesitate to share the Chinuch Today podcast with others. Always, you could send questions, feedback, and guest suggestions to chinuchtodaypodcast@gmail.com. This is Yerach Miel Garfield, wishing you a wonderful day.